Now, before I begin any prepared remarks, let me just say that y'all sound great this morning. My name is David Burke. I'm part of the Edges community here, and one of the reasons I come back is just the talent of our musicians and the gifts that they offer. And yeah, that's right. And I'm not just saying that because Brian's parents are here today. Hi, guys. I know you're proud. Another reason I keep coming back is y'all are so good at loving the kids at Harding Avenue Elementary School, right down the street, including my daughter, who is a rising fourth grader there, and she sees the way that this church cares about her school. A few weeks ago, you might remember we collected donations and signed up volunteers to help facilitate summer camps for kids who otherwise wouldn't get to go to summer camp. And for a few years now, we've had a lunch buddy program that pairs a caring adult once a week with kids who benefit from a lunchtime visit with a caring adult. And if you talk to any of those lunch buddy adults, what you'll hear is that they get just as much out of it as the kids do. Sometimes our friends at Harding send us flowers or cards. And it's clear that this is a reciprocal relationship. Many of those kids take part in our worship conversations. Many of the adults at Harding take part in our worship conversations. All that on top of they educate many of our Edges kids over there. Now I wonder if we could create a quick visual. If you in the room have a connection to Harding, if you have participated in some ministry by your presence or your prayers, your resources, if you have if your kid goes to Harding, kid went to Harding, if you've earned a paycheck there, if you live in the Harding district, would you raise your hand for just a minute? All right, look around and look at all the connections in the room. Keep them up for just a second. So that's a lot of hands. For those on the live stream, because you can't see around the room, first thing you would notice is what a good-looking group of people we've assembled here. But two, bunch of hands around the room because lots of people have a connection with that school. So today we continue our series called Good Enough, with a question mark, enough, in which we've explored concepts related to the idea of enough. If you were here last week, you'll recall that Preston helped us consider a question, how much is enough? How much of anything is enough? We've discovered that many of us wrestle with that question, and we struggle to come up with a concrete answer that we feel good about. And for the most part, that question, how much is enough, is an inward one. How much is enough for me and mine? Today we'll build on that question as we explore a more outward one. Is there enough for all? Said another way, is there enough of the things like food, water, or resources in the world for every person in the world? Now, because topics of poverty, injustice, and inequality are so complicated, we can never cover it all in one conversation. So we'll limit ourselves today to just a few concepts. And to help us navigate, let's define some common language. If we apply the idea of being rich or poor beyond the typical context of money, think about what are some other things that we could be rich or poor in. Think about it for a second and then call out some ideas. What can we be rich or poor in? Friendships, spirit. I heard self-esteem and patience. Love, empathy, time, family, food. I sense we could keep going all day. There are a lot of things, right? We can be rich or poor in. For the purposes of our conversation today, let's define rich as having an abundance of things that are healthy for people to have, and let's define poor as having a lack of the things that are healthy for people to have. And by that definition, though some of us may feel overall more rich than poor or overall more poor than rich, certainly every one of us is lacking a good thing we need or want, and every one of us certainly has something good to share. In preparation for our conversation today, I've been talking to lots of folks on the subject, and last Sunday I interviewed a panel of 3 8-year-old Harding Avenue students who were also Edge's kids, and they had lots of good thoughts about today's topic. A couple of them were so excited about this, they joined us upstairs to hear about it today. The interview setting was my kitchen table, and over a couple of bowls of mac and cheese, some fruit, and one ketchup sandwich. Here's a paraphrase of our conversation. I said, "Girls, I have a serious question for you. I'm going to preach next Sunday, and I need some help with the sermon." And they said, "Okay." I presented the panel with a question that's relevant for growing girls. When you outgrow your clothes, what do you like to do with them? One of them stated she prefers to give them to a friend or a cousin. I asked why, and she said, "Well, I know it'll fit them, and I know they'll like wearing it." Very practical. So then I asked, but what about people who don't have a friend or a cousin who can share clothes? If their family doesn't have money for the clothes they need, how will they get what they need? And together, the girls determined that Goodwill is the next good choice. As a charity we trust, you can give your clothes to Goodwill. So there you have it. These girls have hand-me-downs figured out. But what about other things? For me, when I'm rich in clothing I've already decided I'm not going to wear anymore, it's easy for me to share that. It doesn't really cost me anything. But in other areas where I'm rich, I don't share as freely. Why is that? I bet you all have some good thoughts about this, so let's take a few minutes to talk about it. If you're new here, don't worry, we do this all the time. It's so easy. So here's how this is going to work. In just a moment, you'll see a couple questions on the screen. We're going to take a few minutes, and I'll invite you to get with 4 or 5 folks around you. If you've been here for a while, look around and make sure that everybody around you gets in a group, and hear your questions. When we're rich in something, having an abundance of something that's healthy to have, what factors keep us from sharing it with those who need more of what we can share? Likewise, when we're poor in something, lacking something that's healthy to have, what factors keep us from being willing or able to receive what others can share? Now, make sure you introduce yourselves and know that wise words and active listening are both things worth sharing. So if you're a talker or a listener, both of those are good. Now I'm going to call you back in just a few minutes. Ready? Go. Take about another 30 seconds. Finish up that last thought. All right, folks, come on back. I'll give you a second to move your chairs back over to your table. Take a sip of your coffee, whatever you need to do. Okay, so let's hear a little soundbite of something good you heard at your table. First question was, when we're rich in something, what keeps us from sharing it? What's something you heard at your table? Laziness, okay.
Like the garbage bag or clothes in the back of your car forever.
Yes. I can relate, yes. So Devin says when you got this bag full of clothes in the trunk of your car that sits there forever waiting for you to get over to Goodwill. What else?
Worried about the future.
Worried about the future, okay. Sentimental value, like we might not want to let go of something because of the sentimental value it holds.
Sometimes we may not realize that we're rich in something and think that we need more of that thing that we're already rich in.
Okay, yeah, so we might not realize that we're rich in something, and maybe we don't realize that's something we can share. Pride of having earned whatever you're rich in.
It takes some serious sacrifice to give the things that you have. So that can be really, really hard for lots of people.
Okay, it's a sacrifice to give away something that you're in. It costs you something. Okay, how about one more? Fear of not having enough for yourself. Maybe you don't want to give away because if I give away I have less, and maybe that's not enough. Okay, so what about on the other side? What are the things that prevent us from receiving what we need? Pride? Not knowing what you need? Okay, feeling you should be adequate enough to provide for yourself. What was that? You think you don't deserve it? And one over here? Yeah, I don't want to inconvenience someone. Sorry, say that again?
All those things that people just said will keep you from sharing it, so nobody actually may know that they need it.
Yeah, so everything that people said are to keep us from sharing, so how would we know?
Being embarrassed or ashamed.
Shame or embarrassment? Fear of being indebted to someone. Desire to keep up an image. Wow, y'all have really thought about this. Okay. So, I think I'm taking notes here, and what I see is there's some similar things on both sides of the issue. Pride shows up on both sides. I'm too proud to share what I have because I earned it. I'm too proud to receive something because I should be able to provide for myself. These are thoughts to take away from the conversation today and give some more thought. So we have these barriers on both sides that get in the way of good sharing, and we'll come back to that. But we still haven't answered the title question, is there enough for all? Let's go back to my conversation with the girls. I asked, do you think there's enough food, water, and resources in the world for everyone to have enough? The answer was a unanimous no. And they said they knew because there are lots of homeless people in the world who outwardly appear to not have enough. So I clarified, right, so there are lots of people in the world who don't have enough, but do you think in the whole big world there's enough food or water or anything else so that everyone could get enough of what they need? This time it was a resounding yes from all three. And with regard to physical needs, like food and water, they're right. It's well documented that on our planet of about 8 billion folks, we already produce enough food for about 10 billion folks. But don't take my word for it. Listen to Heinz Wilhelm Strubanoff, who says, "We could quite easily provide food for 10 billion people. Conscious consumption and less waste in rich countries would already be a safe strategy to provide affordable food for all." Rich countries, that's us. Heinz works with the World Bank Group, a global partnership founded after World War II and has since grown to include over 170 member nations, all working together to end world poverty. They have lots of useful information on their website, www.worldbank.org. That'll stay up there for a second so you can take a picture of that link if you want to remember it later. The same group also says there's enough water to go around, though accessibility is severely limited, and climate change is making accessibility more challenging. So if there's enough food and water, and perhaps other things that are healthy to have, maybe the more provocative question is, why doesn't everyone have enough? And to examine this question, this idea, we'll zoom in on money, specifically in the United States. Income inequality, or the wealth gap, is often in the news. You've probably heard about it before. And a recent article in The Atlantic included this chart. Now on this chart, we see the country's monetary wealth shown divided into the groups of people who hold it. The wealthiest 0.1%, then the next wealthiest 9.9%, and the remaining 90% of Americans. And we can personalize those curves in this way. Let's say we have 100 people in the room this morning, and we've got $100 to go around. That means we'd hand $20 to one person, actually 1/10 of one person, but it'll be less messy if we just say one person. Then we'd split about $60 between the next 9 or 10 people, and the remaining 90 people would split $20. Just think about that for a second. The amount of inequality that is. As wildly unfair as that may seem, that's the reality in the United States today. That chart, that reality, makes me feel a sense of despair. And it makes me wonder, what's a Jesus follower to do? Scripture makes it clear that God cares deeply for the poor, with Jesus' earthly ministry as proof. We understand that Jesus lived simply and frequently spent time with poor folks who were out on the margins of society. Today, we know that poverty disproportionately affects people of color, especially folks who identify as Native American, Black, or Hispanic. And there are some common narratives that need to be dispelled. Many folks believe monetary poverty usually stems from some kind of moral failing or lack of motivation. You're lazy. Many folks believe monetary poverty usually stems also from, the narrative continues that we're a nation of upward mobility. Just work hard, and anybody can get ahead. Finally, many folks believe that our social safety net catches everybody who needs catching. In every case, those beliefs represent the exception, not the rule. If you'd like to learn more about that, we'll post a link to a great podcast series from WNYC's On the Media later this week. It's a reliable source that explains a more accurate but more complex view that over many years we've enacted policies and implemented systems that reward folks who are already rich in money, very often at the cost of those who are already poor in money. But this isn't new information. If you looked at the timeline on that chart, then you saw that this problem went back at least to the 1930s. So if we can point to this and call it out for what it is, why don't we do more about it? Specifically, why don't I do more about it? If I'm being honest, I just don't care enough. I really don't care enough to do something about it. A few years ago, I met a guy named Shane Claiborne. He's a tall, unassuming, and kind of goofy guy from Tennessee who became a Christian monk, a new monastic to be specific, and he's also an author and theologian. What I admire about Shane is that you can see he really cares for God and for people with his whole life. When I heard him speak, there was one idea that really stuck with me. Shane said, "We won't end poverty until we make poverty personal." We won't end poverty until we make poverty personal. And what he means is that when we think of the poor as a monolithic, faceless mass of people, we won't care about them. But when we make poverty personal, by getting to know a real person who is poor, that's when we start to care. When it's my friend who's poor, then I start to care. It's connection that moves me to care. The Bible gives us examples of connection that leads to caring. One example follows Jesus' death and resurrection. It's in the book of 1 Thessalonians, and that's a letter from Paul to one of the early churches. Chapter 2 reads like a letter between friends reminiscing about good times together and expressing gratitude for the relationship. In chapter 2, verse 8, Paul writes, "Because we loved you so much, we were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our lives as well." It's a cause and effect. Because we loved you so much, we were delighted to share with you. It's connection that moved Paul to care about those people. Well, that's kind of like our girls choosing to give their hand-me-downs to a friend or a cousin, isn't it? Because I love my friend, my family, so much, I'm delighted to share. I wonder if connection could help tear down some of those barriers that y'all just listed out a few minutes ago. Fear, laziness, being worried about the future, holding on to sentimental things, pride of what I've earned, it cost me something. Or on the receiving end, pride as well, not knowing what you need. Maybe I don't deserve it. Maybe I'm too ashamed, or I don't want to feel embarrassed. So if Shane's on to something, if we might not end poverty until we make poverty personal, and if any of us are willing to just test the hypothesis that it's a connection that moves us to care, well, then it's down to a how. How do I connect with someone who needs something that I can share? And how do I do that in a way that's genuine? Here are 3 suggestions. First, take a personal inventory. In what ways am I rich? In what ways am I poor? Y'all said this. Y'all already knew this. Sometimes we don't know where we're rich. Sometimes we don't know where we're poor. This step will help us to focus the ways that we can offer help and the places we need to receive help. And that'll be different for everyone, so it's important to take a look at it for your own life. Next, educate yourself. Start with the resources that we talked about today. And do some reading. See what's true about poverty in the world today. Finally, partner with an organization. Individual friendships are not the only mechanism for connection. I think that's good because sometimes it's difficult to make friendships, especially with someone on the other side of a social barrier, like race or education or wealth. So look around in our community. There are charities, there are volunteer organizations, there are churches like this one that are all mechanisms for the kind of connection that can move us to care. As an example, one mechanism that's worked well for me to build connection is in our Edges home groups, right here. If you're not familiar with our home groups, these are small groups of folks who commit to meeting together once a week. We do that during the school year, and it's a great way to get to know folks you didn't know before. It's a way you'll connect with a cross-section of folks from our community, and what I've found to be true is that the hypothesis works. The personal connections I've made in those home groups have moved me to care about things I hadn't cared about before, issues and struggles that hadn't affected me directly or the people closest to me. Let's close with this final thought. God promises